Hello Crypto Gang, welcome to another Lambo Live video. Alright, let's talk about Grin, my favorite Mimblewimble implementation. You know, Grin is one of the most fascinating cryptocurrencies in my own personal point of view. And I don't say this lightly, I'm very enthusiastic and open-minded to all different technologies in this space, and that's why I'm constantly in awe. But Grin has mind-blowing features that's on another level. While reading about Grin, some aspects of it made me think, why didn't Satoshi think of this? I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed researching it. Do you know that with Grin, your transaction data are hidden? Not only that, but Grin has no public address whatsoever. Check out their Explorer. See? Only the block and the hashes, among other few details. No address and transaction list. Each block looks like one big transaction, respectively. Very interesting, isn't it? But before we move on, I suggest you pause this video first, then watch my Mimblewimble video. Link is in the description. You need to watch that video in order to understand the technology behind Grin, because I'm not gonna discuss that in this video anymore. So are you done? Moving on then. So since Grin has no public address, how do we send and receive payments, you might ask? One method is using a file. Essentially, the sender will create a transaction file to be sent to the recipient through email or messaging. Then, the receiver will acknowledge it and send that back to the sender. Then the sender will acknowledge it and broadcast to the blockchain or the network, same thing. And that's how a transaction is executed. I'll leave a link to where you can download their wallet and a guide on how to use them. Check the description. What I like about being involved with Grin, and by being involved I mean making videos about them, that's basically all I could do. What I like about being involved with Grin is that it gives me a second chance to be one of the very early proponents of another Bitcoin. Not that Grin is gonna replace Bitcoin or anything like that, but because Grin is very similar to Bitcoin in many ways. It's completely community driven, no greedy corporate filth, founder is anonymous, and its monetary policy is somewhat like Bitcoin as well. But it doesn't seem that way, not at first glance. And my hope for this video is to show you what I see, and you be the judge if you're willing to support Grin or not. Now I did mention in that Mimblewimble video that Mimblewimble is a scaling and privacy solution, but how it scales might not be what you have in mind. You see, there are different ways of scaling. The way Grin scales is with its privacy. Before, I used to say that this protocol is a privacy and scaling solution, but I realized it's more appropriate to call it a privacy-scaling solution because it allows Grin to scale its privacy. Monero has no scaling solution other than its dynamic block size, which isn't really future-proof. Zcash is privacy optional, and what we've found is that most people don't take advantage of their privacy feature because it is hard to scale. Privacy costs a lot of computing power and is expensive to maintain. And that's where Grin shines. Grin's blockchain is compressed. Only a handful of data is stored in it, so the blockchain size remains low. Because of that, it scales mostly with the number of users and little to do with the number of transactions, unlike most blockchains. Because even with the gold standard of privacy, which is Monero, you can only fully benefit from its privacy if you run your own node. If you use a lightweight wallet or something else that doesn't require you to download the whole Monero blockchain or at least a part of it, your privacy benefits are significantly diminished. With Grin's small blockchain, on the other hand, you can easily download, synchronize your node, allowing even your low power devices to run full nodes, even mobile phones. Now I'll tell you what Grin is not. It's not a complete scaling solution. It scales in allowing almost anybody to run their own node fast and easy, but it doesn't scale in transaction throughput. Bitcoin can do an average of 7 transactions per second. Ethereum can do 15. Grin can do 10 probably. So as you can see, it doesn't really scale in that sense. Now, I think it's very important that you consider the community and funding structure of Grin in your investment decision. Grin is developed openly by independent developers all over the world. It's not controlled by any company, foundation, or individual. The coin distribution is designed to be as fair as is known to be possible. It has no planned ICO, no pre-mining, no shady business. It is completely community run. But what does that mean for an investor? Well, since there is no company, there's no shareholder or board to force the developers to hit arbitrary targets and deadlines. I suppose this has its pros and cons. Now, how does it get funding though? As far as I know, the project relies 100% on community donations actually, to my disbelief. Basically, supporting this community is almost completely altruistic because all you get in return is your name or logo in their page and a heartfelt thank you. It's a surprise how far Grin has come through this model alone, considering most other cryptocurrencies that had similar funding models had failed. Just take a look at the Z Classic chart and tell me it's not doomed. That's basically Zcash without funding. See? So the fact that Grin is alive and kicking and screaming today, despite the bear market, speaks volumes. The Grin community values sound money, and their monetary policy, in my opinion, reflects that. Grin has a constant emission rate of 1 Grin per second, that is to say, each block takes 1 minute to mine and rewards 60 Grin every time, forever and ever. At first, this sounds insane, especially if you favor Bitcoin's fixed and non inflationary supply, like 60 Grin miner reward per minute? Get out of here. No one would want to use a currency that's getting devalued by the minute because it keeps minting more coins. Lots of it. However, if you take a closer look at the way they engineer this monetary structure, you'll realize that the first few years of hyperinflation discourages hoarding of grins, like so many people hoarded bitcoins back in its early days. This is their way of disincentivizing whales, as they would possess power that can influence the entire Grin economy more than others. More importantly, Grin's inflation rate dramatically decreases over time, and as such, it becomes stable in the long run. Take a look at this graph. This is Grin's annual inflation rate as opposed to Bitcoin and gold. As you can see in the first 4 years, Grin and Bitcoin have a similar inflation curve. Now, the difference is Bitcoin will be approaching near 0% first, and as we all know, at some point, Bitcoin will stop minting new coins. It has a limited supply of 21 million. Grin doesn't share the same structure in that regard, as they believe in inflation, as long as it's predictable and not based on political or government whim. Essentially, Grin is not for store of value, unlike Bitcoin. It is for digital cash. I think this is gonna be a competitor for Bitcoin Cash. Grin is mined by using a proof of work algorithm called the Cuckoo Cycle. The Cuckoo Cycle is primarily a memory bound algorithm. That is to say, it is bound by the memory bandwidth as opposed to raw processor or graphics card speed, think RAM. And because of this, mining Grin would require much less energy than GPUs and ASICs, even CPUs. But more importantly, it doesn't require you to have an ASIC hardware to mine, at least not for a while. You see, Grin has a dual proof of work mining system. One is Kukuru, the other Kukatu. I swear these names are as silly as can be. Anyway, Kukuru is ASIC resistant, while Kukatu is ASIC friendly. An easy way to not get these two interchange is to note that the R in Kukuru stands for resistant. I'll be leaving a link below on a guide to mining Grin, in case some of you are interested. But basically, if you want to mine using a GPU, you should use Kukuru. But if you plan to use ASICs, use Kukatu. Unfortunately, as of now, there is no ASIC mining in Grin, but a lot of massive chip manufacturers like Obelisk and InnoSilicon recently announced that they are designing their own respective ASIC Grin miners. When will it be ready? Your guess is as good as mine. So for now, we stick to GPUs. Now, I know some of you are wondering, why do they need two proof-of-work mining systems? Wouldn't one do just fine, like in Bitcoin? Absolutely. We only need one, really. The purpose of having two systems is to facilitate a smooth transition from GPU to ASIC mining within 2 years' time. I'm not very familiar with the technical details as I'm not a programmer, but there is a balancing mechanism that attempts to balance out the difficulty and reward. From what I've seen so far, I guess ASIC mining is inevitable in the long run. Although there are cryptocurrencies that are always on their toes when it comes to ASIC snooping in their business. Take Monero for example, which plays this cat and mouse game with ASIC companies. But in order to stay one step ahead, Monero has to have scheduled hard forks, which they do regularly. I'm not sure how they can keep up with this game though. Zcash already gave up, or rather, their community voted against prioritizing ASIC resistance. That way, they could spend more time on other stuff that need to be taken care of. As for the Grin community, their developers anticipate that ASIC will eventually become the primary way to mine Grincoin, so they built this dual proof of work mining system. Now, Grin is awesome and all, but it's not without its obstacles. We already discussed earlier that Grin doesn't scale in terms of throughput or TPS. In my Mimblewimble video, I also talked about how the protocol has no scripting language, and thus limits its ability to have complex functions, such as second layer scaling solution like the Lightning Network, which Bitcoin has. Which again brings us back to the throughput problem. Transaction throughput scaling, no doubt, is an important issue that is not taken for granted, but the developers believe this isn't a glass wall either, and they are working on getting through or around this obstacle. I'll delve into this deeper in future Mimblewimble videos. Now, most of us, myself included, embrace the open source and community funded approach of building Grin. However, this also hinders the development process and timeline of the project due to funding limitations. That would have been fine if Grin was the only cryptocurrency in the world, but competitors are looming in every direction. Beam isn't sitting pretty either. So from a competitive point of view, Grin may possibly be outdone by other projects with similar goals. They may not be as good as Grin, but they will likely have more leverage, and this shouldn't be taken lightly. The anonymous founder of Grin himself is concerned at the payroll for the project's only full-time developer, Yeastplum, which was not livable. According to them, the funds raised at the time were less than 10% of the target on his funding page. Regardless, I still applaud them for taking the purest approach in building their crypto ecosystem. Lastly, there's this one criticism that's been circling around, that in Grin, two parties both need to be online to make a transaction, as opposed to Bitcoin, where you can send payments to anyone if you have their public key and they can still receive it even if they are offline. This sounds like a major drawback, but it's not really true though. It's simply a misunderstanding of how the word interactive is used in cryptography, which states that a transaction between two parties in Grin requires a back and forth communication, which can happen online or offline. Not necessarily that both parties have to be online at the same time. But the ultimate question is it technically possible that one can transfer Grin even if the receiving party is offline? According to the founder, yes, but it's not implemented yet. Damn, it feels good to be in crypto. Love you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a comment, like, and perhaps subscribe. I'll see you on the flip side.